Just as a recap for you, been making our way through this series, as you know, called Be Love. And it's a series based on some words from an early church leader named Paul that he wrote to a church he helped start in the ancient city of Corinth. And at the end of his letter that he wrote to them that we call 1 Corinthians, he gave them 5 challenges. We just talked about them in that little trivia sheet there that we've come back to over and over and over again. In 1 Corinthians 16, verses 13 and 14, here are the 5 challenges that Paul gave to them there. He says, I want you to be on guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, and then the one that we've been focusing on in this series, to do everything with love. And so that's what we've set out to do. We're talking together about how can we be love? How can we do everything with love in the world around us and the relationships we find ourselves in? And one of the things that we pointed out is that we believe that in order to really do that, we have to get to know what love truly is, because kind of our series big idea that we've reminded you of each week is this, that the better we get to know love, the better we're able to show love. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to know love, not as the world presents it to us or defines it for us, but as God himself defined it and explained it and set an example for us of what it looks like and is all about in the person of his son Jesus, who was here 2,000 years ago. So we've been looking at his example, the example of Jesus. We've been looking at this explanation of love that Paul gave to us actually in the very same letter in 1 Corinthians, not 16, but a few chapters before that in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We've been looking there at the chapter often called the Great Love chapter, verses 4 to 8. And as I pointed out to you, Paul gives us this great description that in many ways is somewhat like a puzzle with, I think there's like 15 different pieces or descriptions of love that he gives to us there. And we put it all together, it paints for us this kind of holistic and profound representation and reflection for us of what love is and looks like and is all about. And so the better we get to know that, the better we're able to show that to others around us in the world that we find ourselves in. So far we've covered 6 of those descriptions that Paul's given to us. We talked a couple weeks ago about these ideas that love is patient, that love is kind, and that love does not envy. We said that it's patient, that it's long-suffering, it's slow to boil. We said that it's kind and that it looks to be both good to people and good for people, that it's both nutritious and delicious, right? We kind of painted that picture for you when we talked about that then. We also said that love does not envy. It doesn't get caught up in wanting what other people have and not wanting others to have what you want. That instead of competing with everybody else around us, which is so natural and normal in our world, love instead chooses to celebrate people around us and celebrate the good things that are happening in their lives instead of competing against them for those good things for ourselves. And last week, we continued the conversation. We started talking about this idea that love does not boast, it is not proud, and it is not rude, or it doesn't dishonor others. We said that to boast or to be proud was to puff up and to promote ourselves, and that love doesn't do that. It chooses humility and to be sacrificial and to serve others instead. We said that love does not dishonor others. The idea there was that we don't violate God's standard, the way God intended things to work, the way God intended things to be for us as we interact with each other. We talked about this idea that in the beginning, God created all of us with intrinsic value and worth. And everything that we do, the way that we treat people, talk to people, and think about people, should affirm the value and worth that God, in the beginning, created all of us with. And so whether it's our words, or our actions, our attitudes, or even our thoughts, the things that we think about people and think toward people, all of these things can either be dishonoring to them or rude or violate God's standard to that, or can instead choose to honor them. And so we talked about humility and honor last week. And so we're going to continue then looking at the next several of these descriptions that Paul gave to us in 1 Corinthians 13 tonight. And to kind of introduce those, I want to read for you. We got the passage up here on the screen that we've been looking at together, 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 to 8. And here's, again, what Paul says. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it does not dishonor others. And the next one is one I actually introduced to you in week 1, where he says it's not self-seeking. We're going to kind of skip over that one tonight because in week 1 I pointed out that this one here, the idea of love not being self-seeking, was kind of the centerpiece for all the other descriptions. If you imagine the puzzle, it's kind of the piece right in the middle, the heart of the puzzle, around which all the others kind of revolve. All the other ones kind of reflect that and unpack what it means to not be self-seeking. So we're not going to spend a lot of time tonight on that particular one. We're going to move on to this next section and talk about how love is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs, and how it doesn't delight in evil but rejoices with the truth. And so as you can see, we've got a lot of ground to cover tonight, and that's the first one I want to talk to you then about is this one right here where Paul says this, that love is not easily angered. And I don't know about you guys, but it's just hearing those words, they're simple words, love is not easily angered. I don't know about you, but I know for me that just those simple words are deeply convicting. Because I think for many of us as guys, this is an ongoing struggle that maybe not everyone in the room, some of you are wired different than others, and perhaps you have a very easygoing personality and persona, and maybe you just don't get riled up about very much. But for many of us, I know being a guy myself and interacting with many of you as men and hearing your stories and hearing your struggles at times, I know that this particular one is a big struggle for many of us. That if we're honest, some of our worst moments that we wouldn't want to have put up on the screen for anyone else in the room to see tonight are moments when we do exactly what he says here love does not do, which is to get easily angered. Are you with me? And again, I'll just speak for myself and know that there are many areas of my life where this is not a problem because I'm good at holding my stuff together in certain situations and settings. But there are other spaces and places and situations and other people where this is a much bigger challenge for me. And so I'm excited to talk about it and also somewhat scared to talk about it because I know there's deep implications for all of us if we're going to be loved. Love is not easily angered. It's not easily provoked. In many ways, it's somewhat related to what we talked about a few weeks ago when we said love is patient, that it's slow to boil, that it's long-suffering. It doesn't get riled up easily, or it chooses to not get pushed over the edge of our anger and our frustration, which is so natural and so normal for so many of us. And obviously one of the things I wanted to point out with this is that there are some times in life, there are some situations and circumstances, perhaps there are even some people and different things that we encounter that should stir up a little bit of frustration and anger with us. We see an example even with Jesus that there were moments where even he was frustrated by certain things, and yet we have to make sure to really distinguish what we see there with him and what we're talking about here with this tonight. In Jesus' case, what we read about with him 2,000 years ago, there were at least one situation, maybe a couple different situations where he was at the temple, kind of the center of religious activity for his people in his day. And he was frustrated because some of the religious leaders and some of the people that recognized an opportunity, they were manipulating people who were trying to draw near to God, and they were taking advantage of that to benefit themselves. And in many ways, the people that were trying to draw near to God, because of the things that some of these religious leaders were doing and other people around the temple were doing, they were actually keeping people away from God, the way that God wanted them to draw near to him. And this frustrated Jesus, as it should have. And he demonstrated that. And what I want to point out to you tonight is, again, there are some moments where some of that is called for and appropriate and okay. But I want to distinguish something for us tonight. When we talk about this idea that love is not easily angered, when Paul is challenging us with this in these words that we read in 1 Corinthians 13, in light of that idea of not being self-seeking, what I want to point out to you tonight is this. So what we're not talking about is we're not talking about opposition, this kind of passionate opposition to evil. But instead, what we're talking about is an anger that really shows up as a selfish concern for our own rights. And so it's not about getting angry at things that are wrong in the world and that are evil in the world. That's a different story. What we're talking about isn't that, but rather a selfish concern, an anger that comes out of our own self-centeredness and out of a defense for our own rights. And that's where I want to spend a little time on this with you tonight. I want to talk with you, I think when it comes to this idea of being easily angered, I don't want to spend as much time talking to you tonight about what that means. I think it's pretty obvious. Again, we can have a lot of pictures come to our head to understand what we're talking about that. What I want to spend a few minutes talking with you tonight instead on this is I want to talk to you a little bit more about why we struggle with this and how we can choose something different and how we can choose something better than that. And to do that, I want to begin by sharing with you something that I feel like I've learned about myself that I'm pretty sure is true of you as well. There are many times where, again, I hold my stuff together. I don't get frustrated. I am slow to anger. I'm slow to be provoked and those kinds of things. But there are other moments where I don't, where I'm not. And one of the things that I found about myself in those moments, and again, I think this is probably true of all of us in the room here tonight as well, is this, that most times, most of our anger problems are really idle problems. Some of you are probably thinking, what is this guy talking about? What even is an idol? I mean, we live in the 21st century. Most of us don't we're not back in ancient Greece or ancient Rome or some ancient time where people had these kind of like statue gods they would set up in their houses or in a corner of their property, and they'd go and worship some idol. I mean, what are you talking about? It's an idol problem. And I want to just grant you that most of us, I don't know everyone's story or everyone's situation at home, but most of us probably don't have any idols at home per se. What I do think all of us have, and sometimes we don't even recognize it or realize it, is we do have our own sets of idols in our hearts. So we may not have them physically, literally in our homes, but we do have some idols in our hearts. A lot of different things that we put at the center of our lives, at the center of our satisfaction, the center of our sense of fulfillment and contentment and happiness and joy, things that we may not even realize it, but they're kind of there. They've got the throne of our hearts, the throne of our lives, and everything kind of revolves around that, whatever that idol or those idols happen to be for us. And here's one of the problems with whatever it is that we might put there as kind of the center of our lives, the center of our fulfillment and contentment. Those things, whatever they might be, they always overpromise and underdeliver. And yet over and over again, I find in my own life and with all of us, probably in our own ways and shapes and forms, we continue to go back to them though. We try to keep these idols, these things that kind of take a very sacred space in our hearts and in our lives, and we try to keep them there. And here's what I found out about many times when I'm easily angered. This is why I say most of the time our anger problems are really idol problems. Here's what I found about myself. Many times that I find myself the most frustrated, the most irritable, the most angry, the most upset. Many times what's happened is somebody's been messing with my idol or my idols. There's some things that matter deeply to me in my heart. In many ways, I've let certain things take God's rightful place in my heart. I've wrapped my whole life around some of these things. And when people start poking around with those and messing around with those and trying to move them or knock them out of place, it's hard for me not to be easily angered. Let me explain for you what some of those idols are, and I think you'll see what I mean by that with this. I actually want to share with you 4 idols that many times I think are in place in our hearts. Some of them actually we've talked about before when we did this series, A Man and His Traps, years ago. They identified 3 of these. I've added a 4th for you tonight, and we have them up here on the screen. Let me walk through those with you. I want to point out to you and talk to you here for a moment about, first of all, the idol of control, the idol of significance, the idol of comfort, and the idol of respect. When it comes to this idea of the idol of control, here's what I mean by that. Some of us, we don't even realize this is happening, but at the center of our hearts, at the center of our satisfaction, at the center of our lives, at the center of our sense of contentment and fulfillment and just happiness in life is this idea that if we can only just kind of control things and manage things and make sure things go the way that we want them to go, then we're gonna be good. And we're gonna be happy, and we're gonna be safe, and we're gonna be secure and satisfied. For others of us, it's an idol of significance, the idea that if we can just do something great, if we can accomplish something that matters, if we can get people around us that matter to us to look at us with a sense of being impressed or awe in some way, that they think we've done something or we've become something or we've accomplished something great, if we can not kind of blow it in front of other people and make them look at us with less excitement and enthusiasm about who we are and what we've done, if they can look at us that way, then we're gonna be okay. We're gonna be satisfied and content. For some of us, it's an idol of comfort. And what I mean by that is just the idea that for some of us, the most important thing is we just wanna make sure that life is easy. We work hard, we wanna come home and rest hard. We've earned it, we deserve it. We don't wanna be interrupted. We don't wanna be inconvenienced. And in many ways, without even realizing it, we can make an idol of our own comfort and ease and being able to be carefree. The last one that I added into this is one that I wrestle with all the time, particularly as a dad with my kids, and it's the idol of respect. And what I mean by that is just living with this idea that, you know what, we're in charge. We have authority. Our voice should be heard. It should be listened to. It should be obeyed. You should respect me. Now again, there are a lot of other idols we could talk about and I could probably point out to you, but I think many of the idols that some of us have in our hearts at the center of our lives can be reflected in these 4 things. They always overpromise and always underdeliver. They begin to take God's place in our hearts and our lives, and I think many times the thing that stirs us up to anger, that keeps us from being kind of calm and long-suffering and patient and slow to boil is when somebody starts messing with one of these. I want to give you an example that I think will illustrate that tonight, and maybe you can relate to this, and I don't want to pick on my kids for a moment, but probably one of the toughest areas for me to not be easily angered is as a dad with my kids. And it's because many times they actually start to ruffle with all of these idols in my heart and in my life. I could give you lots of stories tonight of examples of that, and I want to give you just one that I think will illustrate it well. It happened actually just last week. We have this happen all the time for us. And it usually has to do with driving anywhere with all three of our kids in the back seat. Last week, we were driving somewhere at the end of a long work day. It had been a long day full of all sorts of responsibilities and things I had to take care of. In C2, there were some challenging conversations, all sorts of tough things to deal with. And by the time I got home, the last thing I wanted to deal with were three kids that couldn't get along in the back seat of the car, even though they darn well knew better, right? And so what happens? We're driving down the road, and all of a sudden, three normal kids, beautiful, amazing blessings of kids that God has given to me, who I'm so grateful for. All of a sudden, they go all WWF in the back seat, right? And they are smack talking each other. They are back slapping each other. It's like a Royal Rumble back there. And I'm driving along, and all of a sudden, all these idols in my heart start to get messed with, poked around, kind of rattled around with. Think about the idol of control. All of a sudden, this guy here who wants to feel like everything's under control. I got this. It's all good. Not under control anymore. It starts to bother me. When I think about this idea of comfort, it's been a long day. Some of you can relate to this. You come home from work, man, you've earned it. You deserve a break. Breather, you shouldn't have to deal with this. You shouldn't have this interruption or this inconvenience, right? And our idol of comfort starts to get messed with. The idol of respect, you turn around nicely, kids, you better knock it off. Kids, you better knock it off. Knock it off, right? Because all of a sudden, this idol that they should respect me. I'm the dad. You're supposed to listen to me. I'm the one in authority. You're supposed to do what I say. You're not doing it. You're messing with my idol of respect. Even the idol of significance at times. I had to make a phone call during that car ride with somebody from church. And all of a sudden, they're messing with my sense of wanting to make sure that person thinks I'm a good pastor and a good dad, right? And they're messing, playing around with my idols. Sometimes I don't even know we're there. But many times they're at the center of my heart and my life and my sense of contentment and satisfaction and joy. And many times, all of us have idols. If they're not these, they're things like these, that when people mess with them, it's tough for us to avoid being easily angered. I think there's some things that we have to do if we're gonna make the choice of being love and choosing love in this way, of not being easily angered. There's a couple things we have to do with our idols, because most of our anger problems are really just idol problems. Let me give you a few things that I try to do and I'm not perfect at. But I'm trying to get better at this, and I want to encourage you in this as well. A couple things that I think we can do to choose a better way. The first thing is we need to acknowledge the idol. When you are being tempted and tried to be easily angered, I hope that God will have enough space in your heart and your life to grab your attention, even for just a split second, and to say to you, you're probably getting angry because someone's messing with one of your idols. And let's talk about that. I think we have to begin with acknowledging what's going on in our hearts and the idols that are there and the things that we're dealing with there. And then number two, we have to identify the lie that we're wrestling with that too. The lie that whatever idol it is that's being messed with is trying to manipulate us with. That if everything's just under control, life is good. If I'm significant and doing things that matter and doing things that count and people are impressed with me, life is good. If I'm comfortable and things are easy and I'm not interrupted and I'm not inconvenienced, life is good. If people that should respect me are respecting me, life is good. Those are lies that these idols try to convince us to believe. We got to acknowledge the idol, and then we've got to identify the lie, and then we've got to replace it with some kind of truth. I think of my kids. I think of that idol of control. God never said to me, Tyler, be in control. He just said, be an example. things probably won't be in control very often. He's the one in control, not me. The truth that I need to replace it with is he's just asked me to be an example. When we think about that idea of comfort, God never said it was going to be comfortable and easy, and he never said we deserved it or didn't deserve it. He just said that to follow me, you have to pick up your cross and die to yourself, because love isn't self-seeking. It's not self-centered. It's going to cost us something. It's a truth that I replace with that. When it comes to significance, God never said go prove yourself and do something great and impress a bunch of people. He said you have all the value and worth you need in me. Just acknowledge the idol and identify the lie and replace it with some truth. And all these different things I think that we wrestle with, and whether these are your idols or not, I think these are things that we've got to begin to practice if we're going to be slow to get angry, if we're not going to be easily provoked, if we're going to choose to be love in this way. Nobody said it would be easy. In fact, I promised you from the beginning that love is a choice, and only what? The strongest will choose it. And this is why. Because it's not easy, but it is good. Second thing that Paul talks about is not only this idea of being slow to anger and not being easily provoked, but as we continue on, he talks about how love keeps no record of wrongs. I think this is a big one too. I think in general, I don't want to over-stereotype. I think many times we as guys can sometimes have an easier job with moving on or putting things behind us than our female counterparts at times, but still we struggle with it. Depending on who it is and what they've done, this is not always an easy way to be loved, but it's so important. And I think what we're talking about, or what Paul was talking about with this, is pretty obvious. The idea of keeping no record of wrongs essentially comes down to making the choice to forgive others around us who have hurt us or offended us in some way, right? This is what it means for us to be love to them, because love keeps no record of wrongs. Not some record, not a short record, not a short-term record. What kind of record? No record. Now, the word that Paul used here is actually an interesting one. It's kind of an accounting term. Any of you in like business or finance, or you're like an accounting type personality, you like that kind of stuff, a few of you in the room, this is the kind of language that Paul's using here, and it essentially implies a couple of different things. I think what he's saying here when it says that love keeps no record of wrongs, essentially he's saying to us it keeps no spreadsheets and it keeps no scorecards. I'll give you a couple analogies to try to match several of you in the room, right? No spreadsheets, no ledger accounts, no kind of list of the things that somebody's done against you that you're holding against them as some kind of hit against their account with you. No scorecards, no keeping track. You don't keep a record of the wrong that you've done, but love instead chooses forgiveness instead. Now, this is a tough thing, but here's what I want to point out to you tonight. And again, part of what Jesus is calling in all of us, or for all of us, when he says to come follow me, I think as challenging as this is, we have to understand, first of all, how he has forgiven us, the example that Jesus has given to us. Because I think we choose to forgive others because we have been forgiven, right? And again, this is part of what Jesus invites us into with him. I want to read for you just a passage of scripture that I think illustrates this so well. Jesus was the greatest example of what it looks like to do this, to keep no record of wrongs. And he challenged us to follow suit with that, to follow his lead with that. In a little example that he gave, actually in the book of Matthew, chapter 18. Matthew was one of his disciples, his early followers. And Matthew recorded this story for us of an encounter, an interaction Jesus had one day with one of his other followers, a guy named Peter. It says this in Matthew 18, verses 21 to 33. It says, Peter came to Jesus and asked him, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? And there was a lot of different traditions in that day. How many times you're supposed to forgive someone before your hands are clean and you don't have to forgive them anymore? And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. I mean, that's almost like a joke. I mean, nobody had that kind of money. If you owed that, you were never paying that back, 10,000 bags of gold. And this man who owed that was brought to him, and since he wasn't able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. He did the only thing he knew how. And he said, be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. It says the servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. And then it says this, but when that same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. I mean, this was such a minute fraction of what he had owed his master, the debt that his master had forgiven of him. And he goes to this person and he grabbed him and he began to choke him and he said, pay back what you owe me. He demanded. It says his fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him and said essentially the same thing he had said to his master, be patient with me and I'll pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. It says, then the master called the servant in and said, you wicked servant, I canceled all that debt that you had with me because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? I don't know about you, but that is such a simple and yet powerful and profound story. It's such a great reflection for us of the kind of comparison of what Jesus has forgiven each one of us as we come to him and embrace what he's made available through his death on the cross and his resurrection from the dead. And no matter what someone has done to you, I don't want to downplay it in any way, shape, or form, but in light of all that he's offered us forgiveness for in our relationship with him, I think he would say to us, why not? How could you not? Choose to show and reflect that same love to people around you by extending forgiveness and grace and mercy to them, by keeping no spreadsheets or scorecards, right? In your relationships at home, with your spouse, with your kids, with your family, your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors, your classmates, with others around you, will you make the big, bold, audacious choice to love through forgiveness, even when you don't feel like it, even when they don't deserve it, even when they haven't even asked for it, even with your enemy? You see, I know that we can't be reconciled with people that don't want to be reconciled with us, but we can choose to forgive anyone that we choose to give forgiveness to. And I think Jesus looks at us and says, I set the bar high. I gave you the example to follow. Look at the ways that I loved you. While you were my enemies, I died for you. I laid down my rights, the hold I had on whatever you owed me, and I took it on myself so you could be forgiven. And then he looks at us and he says, come and follow me. Third thing that Paul talks about that I just want to highlight with you tonight is that not only is love not easily angered, and love does not keep record of wrongs, but love rejoices with the truth. Actually, the full statement, as I read to you earlier, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. And I'm so thankful for this statement in this passage because I think sometimes you can almost get a mushy-gushy feel out of some of these things, that love feels so easy. Oh, we're supposed to be patient with everybody. Oh, we're supposed to be kind. Oh, we're supposed to be forgiving. It can almost feel too easy with people, like there's nothing hard, or we don't ever have to address things that are broken or wrong or need to be fixed in the relationships that we find ourselves. And yet I love that Paul reminds us here that sometimes one of the most loving things we can do with people is to bring truth into the relationship, into our interaction with them. Because love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. As I've thought about that and what that means for me and what that means perhaps for all of you guys here tonight, there's a few things that if we're going to be loved, there's a few things we may need to choose to do or to enter into in order to choose this bold, again, brave choice of being loved. And those few things I want to share with you are up here on the screen, that sometimes to choose love, we may need to choose hard confrontations. I don't mean to pay people back. I don't mean to get even with them or to show them who's boss, but I mean sometimes there are things that because you love someone, it may be someone in your family, it may be someone in your circle of friendship, it may be someone sitting around the table with you at Manday Monday, it could be someone you work with or in your neighborhood, but because you love them, not because you don't love them, but because you love them, there's a way in which love doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. And sometimes love then actually requires us to choose hard confrontation. Sometimes that leads to hard conversations as well. We have to wade into uncomfortable territory. This is so difficult in our culture. We can't talk about hard things without it getting so ugly between us, right? But love, there's an element in which to choose love. Sometimes we have to choose even having hard conversations because we love the people that we're having these conversations with. I can't tell you over the years the number of times I've had to have these kinds of things with people. I hate it. It grinds against the people pleaser in me, the part of me that wants people to like me and to want to be around me and be in relationship with me. And yet I know that sometimes what love requires of me, the strong, bold choice that love invites me to make, is to bring truth into a situation out of love for somebody that I care about. Not only is it hard confrontations and hard conversations, though sometimes it's not just what we see in somebody else, something that needs to be addressed. Sometimes it's what is actually happening with us. Sometimes it's hard confessions. Because I think it's important for us to understand that love doesn't just rejoice with the truth and that it brings truth, but it seeks to be in the truth. It seeks to be truthful about ourselves. And sometimes one of the most loving things you can do, even though it doesn't feel like it, is to actually come clean and not keep things hidden or secret or covered up anymore. And again, only the strongest will choose it, but I think it's all part of this idea that love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. The last thing I'll share with you then is just this tonight, that I think sometimes we put love and truth on this kind of spectrum where it's either one or the other. But I want you to understand tonight when we look at this, it's not truth or love, but always truth in love and even truth as love. Truth as an expression of our love for someone around us. It does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. As we've been reminded each of these weeks so far, fellas, Jesus loves us enough to call us into something more, into what we were made to be from the beginning, and what many of us settle for less than in our lives. And he says, come follow me. Look at how I've demonstrated love to you. And then make the choice, the strong, bold, brave choice to show love in these same ways to others around you. By refusing to be easily angered, addressing the idols in your life, by refusing to keep record of wrongs with others, that just as we have been forgiven, we commit as an expression of love to giving forgiveness to others around us. And by refusing to delight in evil or to just let things go, but to step into the tough waters at times that love requires of us in order to rejoice with the truth.